This is the World Organic News for the week ending 31st of December 2018. John Moore reporting. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. This week we begin with a story from another transition town and a quick reminder from the Wikipedia page on transition towns. The term transition town refers to grassroots community projects that aim to increase self-sufficiency to reduce the potential effects of peak oil, climate destruction and economic instability. So with that in mind, we have a post from Future Kinsale entitled Transition Town Kinsale and Sustainability. This post first caught my eye as it referred to a community orchard. Quote, Kinsale Community Orchard has been planted at the site of the Sports and Leisure Complex in conjunction with the Sali Community Association and is now maintained in collaboration with Donald Chambers of Kinsale College. Fruit and nut trees have also been planted in 3 residential areas in Kinsale and at the allotment site at Ringaroan. Interest in developing community gardens is also possible in this location. Margaret Thulia, Mary Minihan and Mary Heffernan have maintained the edible landscaping trail with some helpers over the last number of years, and this is marked on Kinsale maps, end quote. This is the sort of thing that is going on all over the world. Edible landscaping, community orchards and gardens. Following at least half a century of confining food production to the backyard or the farm, a growing movement to bring food production back to the centre of consciousness has been growing. Many community gardens are now passing their 20-year mark. These centres can and do act as knowledge hubs where the wisdom of the crowd and of the elders is passed on. Food growing is returning to the people and it is organic in nature. Many of the community gardens are based upon permaculture principles. These then permeate across the towns and suburbs, growing quietly in the background. An underground movement with great outcomes. Another experiment is underway in California. It's covered by the story, a method of drought-resistant organic farming from the Craftsmanship magazine. It tells the story of Paul Kaiser and Elizabeth Johnson, who run Singing Frogs Farm, Sebastopol, California. And they do their work on 8 acres. Quote, Kaiser, an ebullient former woodworker who was only 40 when I first visited, farms a mere 8 acres and harvests fewer than 3 of them. Nonetheless, his methods are at the forefront of a farming movement that is so new, at least in the US, and so built for climate change world of diminishing rains, that it opens up gargantuan possibilities. One might call this methodology sustainability on steroids because it can generate substantial profits. Last year, Kaiser's Sonoma County farm grossed more than $100,000 per acre, which is 10 times the average per acre income of comparable California farms, and this includes Sonoma's legendary vineyards, which have been overtaking farmland for decades, end quote. So we have a dangerous thing here, a person who is doing things differently and making a success of it. As we may be aware, a prophet is rarely welcome in their hometown. But Kaiser may well be the exception that proves the rule. Their methods may sound familiar to listeners of this humble podcast. Quote, Kaiser and his wife Elizabeth manage all their $100,000 per acre income without ploughing an inch of their land, without doing any weeding, without using any sprays, either chemical or organic, end quote. The article is written by Todd Oppenheimer, who spoke with others about Kaiser's methods and how they compare to traditional organic farming. And again, quote, on some of the big organic farms, the soils are incredibly destroyed. Ray Achula, an agronomist at the US Department of Agriculture, recently told me. The reason Achula gave me is almost counterintuitive. While they do avoid chemicals, most organic farmers still resort to what are essentially artificial methods of cultivation, based largely on tearing up the ground with discs and spaders, the same way conventional farmers do, then abandoning it till next season. They also use too much water. As an illustration of Achula's points, in the 5 years since Kaiser stopped ploughing his fields, his irrigation levels have dropped by more than half, to as little as an hour a week, with production steadily increasing. He now irrigates almost exclusively with a drip system through thin plastic tubes. Meanwhile, some of his organic neighbours still run sprinklers, which require massive amounts of water, much of which is lost almost immediately through evaporation, end quote. I would recommend a full read of the post, link in the show notes. It covers so much more than farming and is really worth the read. Now this leads nicely to our next post, carbon farming, the next competitive advantage. From, and I do apologise to all my Kiwi listeners, Tokerau, Climate Change Action. Quote, the next attribute that is ultimately going to be incredibly valuable is carbon zero, or food that actually helps to restore the environment and doesn't create a carbon footprint, or actually reduces the carbon footprint globally. I think we need to be seriously positioning ourselves to take a lead in that space. We've got an agricultural system that lends itself to being able to do that with a much shorter time window than many other countries around the world. And I think that there's going to be a significant premium in that type of food for a reasonable period of time, end quote. Now there are many places around the world where a transition to this form of growing food could occur quickly. The above case is focused on New Zealand, but it is applicable well everywhere. Our previous post on Singing Frogs Farm shows that even in the Mediterranean climate that's turning dry, carbon farming is a thing that works. Whether the focus is on the carbon or soil health, the effects remain the same. Better food from better soil with higher carbon content. Simples. Not that simple means easy, but it is a simple thing that we are attempting to do, which requires us to overturn 10,000 years of Eurasian farming practice. How hard can that be? Not at all if we do it one garden bed, one paddock, one field, and one farm at a time. This is going to be the great work of the next 20 years. We can sequester sufficient carbon in the soil to give us all time to decarbonise the energy system, feed the growing number of individuals on the planet, and begin the process of purging the excess chemical loads carried by every ecosystem on the planet. We have time, we have the skills, and we surely have the motivation. Much of the southern half of the Australian mainland is 2 days into a 5-day heat wave as I record this. A heat wave with temperatures over 40 degrees C, that's about 105 F in the old money. These heat waves are now a feature of the summers in Australia, this being the 3rd year and the 5th heat wave so far, and it is only December. February is usually hotter, so we can expect at least one more heat wave and possibly 2. The dry heat of Europe's last summer, the fires in the USA and so on all point to what needs to be done. And on that note, I'll draw this episode to a conclusion. Remember, decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. So with all of the above in mind and the fact that we live in the 21st century and we can be in contact with anyone on the planet as long as we have an internet connection, I'm opening up applications for a regenerative agriculture mastermind group. It will be limited to 12 people. We'll meet weekly, online, to discuss our successes, challenges and decisions. The wisdom of the crowd applied to this necessary field of human endeavour. You can have a look at the intro page and click through to the application at worldorganicnews.com/mastermind-application. And there is, of course, a link in the show notes. And, of course, the podcasting checklist is still available over at mrjohnmoore.com. A transcript of this episode is available at worldorganicnews.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week.